God told me to warn you. This is not a normal moment, and this is not a message you stumbled into by accident. You are going to need to sit down, breathe, and listen with your spirit wide open, because what heaven is about to announce over your life is big. This is not small favor. This is not a minor adjustment. This is not a little burst of encouragement to help you survive one more night. No, this is a line being drawn in the spirit between what was and what is about to begin. The Lord is saying that the season you have been living in cannot continue the way it has been. The delay, the pressure, the confusion, the hidden tears, the warfare that made no sense, the doors that would not open, the prayers that seemed to hang in silence. None of it was random and none of it was wasted. You thought you were enduring a long ending, but heaven says you were standing inside a divine transition. You thought you were being ignored, but God says you were being marked. You thought you were buried under the weight of waiting, but in the courts of heaven, you were being set apart, sealed, and prepared as someone carrying more than an ordinary assignment. You are not just another person trying to make it through life. You are not just someone hoping things get better. You are a chosen vessel. You have been called, separated, and reserved for a holy purpose. And that is exactly why the battle around your life has been so intense. The enemy does not fight empty people this hard. Hell does not spend this much energy on someone with no destiny attached to their obedience. What has come against you came against you because something on your life is costly, dangerous to darkness, and impossible to replace. Hear this clearly. God is not merely about to comfort you. He is about to move you. He is about to interrupt patterns that have lasted too long. He is about to confront cycles that try to define you. He's about to step into places that look dead, delayed, and sealed shut, and announce that timing, not your pain. We'll have the final word, chosen one. The Lord says the old labels are breaking. The old season is losing its hold. The old language of fear, disqualification, and disappointment cannot narrate where you are going. You have cried enough under what was. You have bent low enough under what was. You have questioned enough under what was. And now, heaven is releasing a warning and a promise at the same time. Do not keep thinking like the version of you that only knew survival, because you are approaching a shift that will require agreement, readiness, and bold faith. There are moments when God whispers, and then there are moments when he speaks with thunder because the hour is too serious for half attention. C.S. Lewis once described pain as God's megaphone to wake a deaf world and chosen one. That is why this season became so loud, because heaven refused to let you sleep through the moment before your turning point. The pressure was not proof of abandonment. It was proof that something had to break. Something had to wake up. Something had to come alive in you before the next door opened. This is why you have felt such holy unrest. This is why ordinary reassurance no longer works. This is why your spirit has been sensing that something is shifting. Even when your circumstances have not caught up yet, God is telling you now, what is coming is bigger than what you asked for when you were only praying from pain. He is not preparing a small patch for your exhausted heart. He is preparing movement. He is preparing separation. He is preparing divine acceleration. He is preparing to distinguish your before from your after in a way that even you will not be able to deny. And because this word is not casual, Your response cannot be casual either. If this is bearing witness in your spirit, if something inside you is trembling because you know heaven is speaking directly to you, then comment right now, I am chosen and I will not miss my hour. Declare it like someone coming into agreement with the voice of God over their life. Like this message. Subscribe to this channel and share it with someone else who needs this warning before their season shifts. Because what comes next will show you why the silence was never empty. It was sacred. You need to hear this with absolute clarity. Heaven did not lose sight of you in the wilderness. The God who formed you has watched every silent battle, every exhausted prayer. Every night you held yourself together in private while appearing strong in public. Not one tear disappeared into the ground unnoticed. Not one sigh dissolved into the dark without being heard. What felt invisible on earth was fully seen in heaven. The Lord says that the place you called abandonment was often the very place where He kept you closest. You mistook silence for distance, but it was not distance. It was depth. It was the kind of holy hiddenness where God does His most serious work. Away from applause, away from noise, away from the opinions of people who could never understand what He placed on your life. There were days when you watched others move forward while you remained in what felt like the same painful chapter. Others celebrated, announced, arrived, married, built, advanced, and smiled in the light while you stood in the shadows, wondering whether your name had been forgotten. You did your best to bless them. You tried to keep your heart clean. You smiled when it hurt. You said the right things. But underneath that faithfulness, there was a question you barely dared to say aloud. Lord, did you pass me by? And heaven answers that question now with force. No, He did not pass you by. He kept His hand on you when you could not feel it. He preserved you when you thought you were only barely surviving. He hid you because what is marked by God cannot always be exposed too early. Look at Hagar in the wilderness. She was cast out, emptied, and left in a place that looked like rejection from every human angle. It seemed finished. It seemed harsh. It seemed like the story had narrowed into despair. But it was there in that dry and desolate place that the God who sees revealed Himself to her. He did not arrive too late. He arrived at the exact moment her strength ran out, and He opened her eyes to what had already been provided nearby. That is the word over your life right now. What you thought was the proof that everything was over may become the very place where God reveals what He had already prepared. The wilderness was not sent to erase you. It exposed your need, stripped away false security, and positioned you for an encounter you would never have had if life had remained comfortable. That is why this season hurt so deeply. The Lord was not dealing with the surface. He was touching the roots. He was confronting the places where you had tied your identity to outcomes, people, timing, and visible progress. He was teaching you to live under His gaze instead of human recognition. He was showing you that being hidden is not the same as being discarded. Being delayed is not the same as being denied. Being broken before Him is not the same as being abandoned by Him. In fact, some of the deepest evidence of His nearness appears when every earthly support is removed and His voice becomes the only thing holding you together. That is why your story cannot be measured by public milestones alone. Heaven measures differently. Heaven watches who keeps praying when nothing changes. Heaven watches who still bows when no reward is visible. Heaven watches who refuses to let bitterness take root when disappointment has every reason to harden the heart. And that has been your hidden offering. You were not doing nothing. You were becoming someone. You were being shaped into a vessel that does not collapse when external comfort disappears. You were learning how to hear God in dry places, trust Him in unanswered places, and remain faithful in unseen places. That kind of formation is expensive, and it does not happen in shallow seasons. It happens in the wilderness. It happens in the tension. It happens where pride dies and dependence becomes real. So no, heaven has not ignored you. Heaven has been dealing with you too personally, too carefully, too deeply to abandon you now. And if the wilderness has been this sacred, then what comes after it will have to carry a weight your old self could never have handled. That is why the next part matters. Because the delay was never 80 time. It was consecration. What you call delay, heaven called consecration. What you thought was a cruel pause was in truth a holy process. The Lord did not leave you standing still because He had nothing to say. He held you in place because He was dealing with things too deep to rush. You were asking for movement, but God was working on weight. You were asking for the door, but He was working on the person who would be able to walk through it without falling apart on the other side. This is why the season cut so deeply. It was not casual discomfort. It was not random frustration. It was surgery. It was the hand of God going beneath the surface, touching motives, fears, attachments, and hidden wounds that could not be allowed to rule your next season. Joseph is the pattern here. He was given a dream from God, but the dream did not carry him straight into fulfillment. First came the pit, then came betrayal, then came slavery, then came false accusation, then came prison. From the outside, everything in Joseph's life looked like contradiction. The promise spoke of elevation, yet the process seemed to speak only of confinement. The word God had given him pointed toward leadership, but every circumstance around him appeared to move in the opposite direction. Yet none of those dark seasons meant the dream had failed. They proved that heaven was taking the dream seriously. God would never place Joseph into a position of authority while pride, immaturity, hidden wounds, and human impulses still remained untouched. The prison was never evidence of rejection. It was evidence of preparation. In the same way, what once felt like chains around your own life was often the mercy of God, refusing to release you before the appointed time. There were doors you desperately prayed would open, but they would have damaged you if they had. There were people you pleaded to keep in your life, yet they would have slowed your obedience, weakened your discernment, and distracted you from your calling. There were timelines you believed were perfect, but they would have connected you to a version of yourself that was still too fragile to carry the weight of what God was preparing. That is why the Lord allowed certain opportunities to slip through your hands. Not because He was cruel, but because He was precise. He loved your future enough to deny your impatience. He saw what you could not see. The waiting was never wasted. It became the place where your inner life was brought into alignment with the greatness of your assignment. Some desires had to be purified. Some illusions had to die. Some unhealthy forms of dependence had to be broken. God was not simply delaying an event. He was transforming the vessel that would carry the blessing. That kind of work is holy. It is slow. It is deep. And at times it feels severe. C.S. Lewis once wrote about the collapse of old settled happiness. And that is exactly what this season has felt like for many of you. Familiar comforts disappeared before something far more genuine could be born. If everything seems stripped away, it was because heaven was clearing the foundation. God does not build lasting promises on unstable ground. Now that this hidden work has gone so deep, you need to understand what comes next. When God finally says it is time to move, He rarely moves in small pieces. He moves with power. If these words are speaking directly to your spirit, do not remain silent. Respond in faith. Right. My delay was consecration. Declare it boldly. Let your agreement be known before heaven. And if someone you know is growing weary in a long season of waiting, share this message with them. They need to hear that God has not been punishing them. He has been preparing them. Like this message, subscribe to the channel and stay with me, because what comes next may become the confirmation you have been praying for. When God decides the hidden season has accomplished its purpose, He does not always announce the next chapter gently. Sometimes He moves with a speed that surprises even the person who spent years praying for change. That is the kind of moment many of you are approaching. You are not moving toward a minor adjustment. You are moving toward a divine suddenly. A suddenly from God is not an emotional phrase designed to create excitement. It is the point where heaven's perfect timing meets your obedience. It is the moment when years of silence, restraint, and unseen preparation suddenly become visible movement. Joshua stood beside the Jordan River with people who had carried God's promises for years. Yet the river did not part while they stood at a distance, analyzing every possibility. The waters moved only after the priests stepped forward in obedience. That is often how God works. He waits until faith becomes visible. He waits until obedience takes action. He waits until you stop demanding proof before moving, and instead choose to move because He has spoken. This is why your next season will require a different version of yourself. Not the person who keeps negotiating with fear. Not the person who postpones every decision until uncertainty completely disappears. Not the person who says yes during prayer, but no through daily actions. God suddenly does not come simply to inspire you. It comes to reveal whether your heart is ready to move at the speed of His instruction. That is why heaven has invested so much time preparing your heart. If acceleration had come too early, you would have mistaken it for pressure and run away from the very answer you once begged God to send. But now the Lord is teaching you how to recognize His movement when it appears. Even if it arrives differently than you imagine, your suddenly may come through one unexpected phone call. It may come through one conversation, one opportunity, one divine connection, or one simple instruction that changes the direction of your entire future. It may happen within days that what remained frozen for years suddenly begins to move all at once. That is not exaggeration. That is how God restores lost time. He can compress years of delay into one moment of divine release. But hear this carefully. When the door opens, you cannot remain frozen by memories of past disappointments. When the river parts, you cannot continue speaking as though it never will. When God says now, You cannot answer him using the language of your former season. That is why the wilderness taught you obedience under pressure. That is why the silence trained your discernment. That is why the delay exposed every hidden place where fear still held influence. Because once the suddenly begins, heaven will not slow down to match your hesitation. God is not preparing to tease you with possibilities. He is preparing to confront every voice that declared your life would remain stuck forever. Nowhere will that become more important than in the relationships connected to your destiny. What God is preparing is not shallow romance, temporary comfort, or an emotional distraction to ease your waiting. This is about covenant. This is about alignment. This is about discovering who will remain beside you when the weight of your calling becomes visible. That is why this area of your life has felt especially painful. You watched other people fall in love, build families, celebrate milestones, and enjoy the companionship you once believed would already be part of your own story. If you are honest, the deepest pain was not always loneliness. Often it was confusion. You wondered why something that appeared so natural for others became such a battle in your own life. But the Lord is answering that confusion with truth. The delay was never proof that you were unwanted. It was proof that heaven refused to hand you over to someone who could not carry the assignment connected to your life. Ruth did not arrive in Boaz's field by coincidence. What appeared ordinary on the surface was divine orchestration underneath. God had already arranged provision, protection, timing, and covenant before either of them understood the full picture. The same pattern is unfolding in your own life. You are not being asked to chase what is truly yours. You are being prepared to recognize what God Himself has ordained. That requires far more than attraction. It requires healing. It requires maturity. It requires spiritual depth. The wrong relationship can do far more than break your heart. It can weaken your discernment, confuse your identity, drain your prayer life, lower your standards, and tie your future to someone who lacks the spiritual capacity to honor where God is leading you. That is why some relationships had to collapse. That is why certain almost relationships ended just before becoming serious. That is why some doors closed so suddenly that they left you stunned. It was not always punishment. Sometimes it was rescue. Sometimes it was God's mercy, removing what your emotions were willing to tolerate. But your destiny could never survive. The Lord is not writing a hurried love story. He is protecting a covenant strong enough to endure spiritual warfare, purpose, sacrifice, obedience, and glory. He is not merely preparing someone who will admire you. He is preparing someone who can stand beside you, pray with you, build with you, endure with you, and remain faithful when obedience becomes costly. While God has been shaping your heart, He has also been working in theirs. He has been confronting their immaturity, exposing unhealthy patterns, purifying motives, and teaching them what love becomes when it is surrendered to God instead of driven by personal need. So stop calling it absence when heaven calls it preparation. Stop calling it rejection when God calls it protection. The delay has been significant because the covenant attached to your life carries eternal value. If God has guarded this area of your story so carefully, then understand something even greater. His restoration was never intended to stop with relationships alone. If this message is speaking to your heart, respond with faith. Write, God is guarding my covenant. Or declare, I will not settle for less than God's will. Let those words become your public agreement with what heaven is accomplishing behind the scenes. Like this message, subscribe and share it with someone whose heart has been wounded by broken relationships. They need to know that some endings were never rejection. They were rescued. Stay with me, because what comes next reaches beyond relationships. God is about to speak over every area of your life. This word does not stop with love, because heaven is not restoring one corner of your life while leaving everything else in ruins. God is rebuilding the entire structure. He is touching your finances, your health, your calling, your work, your daily provision, and every quiet place where you have wondered whether anything will ever move again. Some of you have been grieving over relationships. Others have been grieving over unpaid bills, exhausted bodies, delayed careers, and dreams that once burned brightly but now seem buried beneath survival. Yet the Lord declares that none of those places have escaped his attention. None of them have been overlooked in heaven. Every closed door has been seen. Every delayed promise has been measured. Every weak area remains under the hand of God. Think about the widow of Zarephath. She was not living in abundance. He preserved your hunger for truth. He preserved your ability to recognize when something was not right. He preserved your future from being swallowed by the season that tried to define you. That is why this is not the hour to speak like a defeated person. This is the hour to recognize that the very thing which once looked immovable is beginning to collapse. The net is tearing. The weight is lifting. The intimidation is breaking. The spiritual atmosphere is changing. What once fed on your confusion is now starving in the light of revelation. What once stood over your life like a shadow is being driven back by the hand of God. This is not wishful thinking. This is the reality of spiritual confrontation. Once truth is received, false power begins to weaken. Once clarity enters, manipulation loses its grip. Once identity is restored, control begins to fail. Once a soul refuses to partner with fear, fear starts losing its dominion. That is why your discernment matters so much right now. That is why your refusal to fall asleep spiritually matters so much in these seasons. That is why your decision to believe God above every old pattern matters now more than ever. Every time you reject the old script, you take strength away from what tried to imprison you. Every time you declare, this is not my ending, you reclaim ground. Every time you refuse to bow to hopelessness, you break another link in the old system. C.S. Lewis understood a profound truth in mere Christianity. He explained how our repeated choices quietly shape who we become. That insight fits this season perfectly, because the trap tried to shape you into a smaller version of yourself through repeated fear, repeated delay, and repeated disappointment. It wanted to train your reflexes until retreat felt wise, self-denouement felt safe, and low expectations seemed mature. But God is reversing that formation. He is rebuilding courage where fear tried to settle. He is restoring expectation where disappointment tried to become your belief system. He is teaching your soul to stand upright again. That is why this battle feels different now. You are not simply enduring it. You are outgrowing it. You are not merely surviving pressure. You are being separated from the identity that pressure tried to create. When that false identity begins to crumble, everything changes. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Your prayers change. Your standards change. Your discernment changes. Your tolerance for what dishonors and drains you begins to disappear. You stop begging for access where you were only being managed. You stop mourning things that were never meant to remain. You stop calling captivity loyalty. You stop calling fear wisdom. You stop calling delay humility. Instead, you begin to recognize that freedom requires a different language, a different agreement, and a different posture of the heart. That is exactly what is happening now. The trap is losing its power because you are no longer feeding it through unconscious agreement. You are waking up. You are rising in clarity. You are remembering who you were before pain tried to rename you. Because of that, this season will not leave you broken, buried, or empty. It will leave you clearer. It will leave you stronger. It will leave you more resilient than everything that ever tried to contain you. Can you feel that something is already shifting around your life? If you believe the trap is losing its power, write in the comments asterisk, I am coming out free. Let that declaration become your line in the sand. What you are about to lose is not your future. It is not your calling. It is not your purpose. It is not your blessing. It is not the promise of God over your life. That is the lie the pressure wanted you to believe. It wanted you to think that because things were delayed, they had been denied. It wanted you to believe that because you were resisted, you had been rejected. It wanted you to assume that because you were attacked, you had somehow stepped outside of God's protection. None of that is true. What is living your life now is not what God ordained. What is living your life now is everything that tried to occupy the lie place, where only God's word belongs. You are not about to lose your destiny. You are about to lose the weight that kept you from walking in it freely. You are not about to lose your voice. You are about to lose the fear that kept your voice trapped behind old wounds. You are not about to lose your identity. You are about to lose the false version of yourself that pain, betrayal, and delay try to build around your spirit. This is the holy reversal that many people misunderstand. When they stand at the edge of breakthrough, when God begins breaking chains, it can initially feel as though something significant is being stripped away and something is being removed. But what is being stripped away was never sent to preserve you. It was sent to bind you. It was sent to exhaust you. It was sent to make you carry burdens that were never supposed to become part of your identity. There are things you have carried for so long, they almost started feeling like part of your personality. The hesitation, the guardedness, the instinct to expect disappointment, the habit of shrinking before being fully seen, the tendency to brace,